Long ago and far away, in enchanted lands across the seas, lived kings and queens, princes and princesses, good fairies and wicked witches, ferocious giants and gentle dwarfs. Their adventures and stories have been told for hundreds of years. Open the pages and listen to the words, and you too can join the magical world of Once Upon a Time.
The Sleeping Beauty. Once upon a time there was a king and a queen who had all the luxuries that money could buy. But their most treasured possession of all was their beautiful baby daughter. In fact, they were so proud of her that they invited all the fairies in the kingdom to her christening. It wasn't every day that the fairies had the chance to go to such a grand occasion, so they made the most of it and went out to buy beautiful party dresses especially for it. The christening was such a happy and colourful occasion. The little princess slept quietly in her cradle and didn't make a sound. "I've never seen such a beautiful little baby," said the Queen of the Fairies. When the King and Queen heard this, it made their hearts swell with pride.
"Thank you all so much for coming here,"
said the king, and then he led them all to the great banqueting hall for a fabulous feast in honour of his little princess. The fairies had just picked up their knives and forks and were about to start eating when they heard a terrible high-pitched wailing sound coming from the end of the hall. They looked towards the grand staircase and saw an ugly old fairy storming down the stairs. She had a long pointed nose and was wearing an enormous black satin cloak. The old fairy looked straight at the Queen and said,
"How can you have a party without inviting me? I am the oldest and wisest fairy in the land."
The poor Queen was rather frightened of her and didn't know what to say.
"Leave it to me,"
the king whispered.
Look, I'm terribly sorry we've offended you, but you're welcome to join in the celebrations,"
he said in his kindest, sweetest voice.
"All right, I'll stay if you insist,"
said the ugly old fairy, but she still wasn't happy.
"I'll get my own back on that pair for forgetting to invite me,"
she muttered to herself. The wicked old fairy certainly took advantage of the king's hospitality. She piled up her plate until you could hardly see her face behind the tall mound of food on it. The banquet lasted a long time, because all the guests had to wait for the old fairy to finish eating. At last, when she'd eaten her final mouthful, everybody left the table and went to bestow gifts on the princess. Great beauty, a kind heart, and a wonderful singing voice were just a few of the gifts given to the lovely princess. When it came to the old fairy's turn, she leant over the cradle and said,
"You will prick your hand with a spindle and die of the wound."
All the other fairies gasped at these terrible words. Then Christina, who was the youngest fairy, stepped forward. "I can't change this awful spell, but I can alter it. You will indeed prick your finger, but you will not die. Instead, you will fall into a deep sleep that will last for 100 years, until a handsome prince awakens you." That night, when all the guests had left, the king ordered that all the spinning wheels with spindles in his kingdom should be burned. So his servants went and collected all the spinning wheels in the land and burned them on a big bonfire in the palace garden. All his subjects were very sad to see their spinning wheels going up in smoke, But they didn't complain. They knew that this had to be done for the sake of the little princess.
I feel so much happier now there are no spindles left in our kingdom,
said the king to his wife. You were very wise to be so careful, said the queen. But what about our poor subjects? Many of them rely on their spinning wheels to earn a living.
Don't worry, I've given a bag of gold to everyone who had to burn their spinning wheel,
said the king. And these kind words made the queen very happy. Many happy years passed, and the princess grew up to be all the king and queen had hoped for, beautiful, clever, and very kind. But one day, the king and queen went on a royal tour, and left the princess to look after the palace. She felt very lonely without her mother and father, so she wandered around the palace looking for somebody to talk to. The only person she could find was an old woman who lived at the top of the palace. The old woman was very glad to see her, as she was feeling very lonely too.
Do come in, dear, said the old woman. I've just baked a cake. Please take a slice and let me make you a cup of tea to go with it.
That would be lovely, said the princess. And when the old woman was in the kitchen making the tea, the princess noticed a spinning wheel in the corner of the room.
What's this strange machine?
asked the princess.
It's a spinning wheel,
was the old woman's reply.
I'll just put this tea tray down and then I'll show you how it works.
The old woman hadn't heard about the king's ban all those years ago, and she didn't think there'd be any harm in showing the princess how to spin. So the old woman sat down at the wheel and started spinning. The princess watched her with eager eyes.
I'd love to have a go myself,
she said. But no sooner had she started spinning than she pricked her hand on the needle and fainted.
Help! Help! The princess has fainted!
cried the old woman. Servants came running from all corners of the palace. One servant threw a bucket of water over her, while another held a jar of smelling salts under her nose. But nobody could make the princess wake up.
Fetch the royal doctor!
shouted the head servant, and one of the young servants ran to tell him about the sleeping princess. When the doctor arrived, he tried all sorts of things to make her wake up. He even put an ear trumpet to her ear and shouted into it. But she still wouldn't wake up. Later that day, the king and queen came back from their royal tour. They were very shocked when they found their beautiful daughter in the old woman's room in such a deep sleep that she couldn't wake up.
You stupid old woman, cried the king. Didn't you know that all spinning wheels were banned from my kingdom many years ago? You deserve to go to prison for this.
The poor old woman couldn't understand what she'd done wrong.
I've lived alone without seeing a soul for many years, Your Majesty. No one told me about the wicked spell, was her reply.
Don't be too hard on the old woman, said the queen. She's not to blame for our poor daughter's fate.
Yes, you're right, said the king. It's not her fault. Come, let's take our daughter down and make her as comfortable as we can.
It's time to turn over to side 2.